Hey Collective, it's Alan. Welcome back to Altruistic channel. Today's video is going to be a follow-up to an article that I just released actually for the LinkedIn crowd, which actually had to do with something I'd noticed as an underlying current, if you will, behind a lot of what's going on in the world today. And so I wanted to speak to it in a way that was very easy to access for those of you who were coming across the channel. And essentially at the crux of the whole situation, I had noticed that there was a pattern developing behind the whole P word and the evolution that it has seen throughout our collective. And so I decided that I was going to actually put it to paper and actually put it out on LinkedIn so that the audience, the intelligentsia, would be a little bit more aware of what I saw actually happening as it played out. And so when it comes to spirituality of any kind, one of the great things that we must balance is the idea that we don't involve ourselves in the world of politics or outright religion, right? For spiritualists, that's something that you just don't necessarily do. Not because it's a hot topic, but because of the fact that each house, each particular grouping of schools of thought vary from one another. So one of the things about discipleship is you stand in the middle, kind of like Switzerland, and you observe the thread of reality or the thread of truth that goes throughout all of it, whether it's fear-induced, whether it's religious, whether it's faith-based, or whether it's scientific. Whatever the underlying form that's trying to manifest through something like that is what we as disciples would look at, or as initiates, what we would focus our attention on to see what the truth is that's trying to come out. And so you kind of run into this thing where you start to develop a really high skill set at pattern recognition and kind of seeing the threads throughout every, from A to Z, right? And so what I had noticed in particular with this whole P word is that one of the things that I found very interesting about it is you guys know that I've been very candid about my whole theory that this is all a big, huge manipulation, and I'm not afraid of it, and I've been very, very open and very honest about what I thought was happening. But that's not what this is necessarily about. But what I wanted to share in the LinkedIn article was a different perspective of how you can see why someone like me, who does kind of stand in Switzerland, would even make a comment about the situation at this point. And what had happened was I started to notice that there was an underlying theme that a repetitive cycle through history, right? And we've all seen on different YouTube pages like David Palmer's page and Natalie over there, Tegan, and my page, that we do seem to be noticing a set of repeating cycles that seem to be reemerging right now. And after 2020, we seem to have gone through a reset, right? So one of the things that we wanted to do, forming the new collective consciousness, which is the movement that's happened organically by the higher cosmos, if you will, by God, Allah, Buddha, whoever you believe in, there does seem to be a push for us going in that direction. And part of that is exposing, or I should say, shedding light onto the shadow sides of insecurity, fears, and so forth, and bringing the form that is actually being hidden within the context of whatever the shadow is to light, right? And showing it to the world so that they can have a better understanding and grasp of what's truly going on. And so with the repetitive cycle of us being on this disc that we keep just doing the same things over and over again, one of the things that I personally had noticed and had spoken to very early on was the fact that I had this feeling that they were actually, there was an undercurrent of going after Roe v. Wade. And what I meant by that was, as I stated in the article that I'll link below here, what I had noticed in particular was that by mandating that we get the across the board, what essentially would be happening is that they would be instilling a sense of almost like a lynch mob mentality, where people who are afraid enough would start to lash out towards each other and get actually annoyed at each other for not wanting to get it or actually getting it, and the two would flip back and forth. And the more that we were able, or I should say, the more that they were able to turn the tide, where we would actually be like all about firing employees if they didn't get it, making sure that it was part of schooling systems, making sure you couldn't get government aid or any type of shelter without having these things, that the rights would be slowly taken more and more away. But by it being under the guise of fear, what would happen is that organically the majority would rule, and they could actually then go after Roe v. Wade, which is the law that governs our ability to control what happens to our bodies and what goes into our bodies. And so I had noticed that very early on. And so in the article, I spoke very candidly about that and referenced the several different articles in the past that I also spoken to it as well. But what a lot of you may not have been aware of, and what I specifically was writing, sorry, there's a hair here. A lot of what, sorry, the hair. So what it was in this article was I was bringing your attention towards the actual truth of what I was actually seeing as another layer above that onion that we call the corruptive influences, right? There's an onion sensation to what's going on in our reality right now, where I started to see various parallels, right? And they were all existing at once. And so every time you pull a layer, you find something else. And so the secondary thing that I'd noticed is by actually having us all test on a regular basis, that they were actually able to collect a lot of DNA sample from us and actually be able to store the information. And what I had made a point in the article about what was warning us, I'm not saying anything pro or against, I'm just stating what I'm seeing. But what I had noted in the situation was that means that they have that information on file. But as far as the legal system is concerned, they really can't access that without warrants for the most part. That is, unless they do something that they have done, which is actually make, again, the majority of the population voluntarily hand it over. If we actually look back over the trajectory of this thing, the one thing we notice is that as of right now, they haven't been able to mandatorily mandate that we all have to get it. And that's the end goal that they're going after. But the only way to do that is to have the majority of the population actually hand those rights away and turn the tide in that direction. And the way that they did that is when you guys decided to go ahead and get this thing, you actually had to get this card that actually speaks to the fact that you actually been that, right? What you don't realize is that in order for you to fly anywhere, you have to allow the government to access your medical records in order to do it. So there goes the warrant. So essentially what they did is that, this is my theory, what they did is that they actually went in the back door of it, and by you voluntarily saying, yeah, I want to fly, you can check my medical records, they now have legal rights to access your information. So you essentially handed away your ability to actually control your privacy acts because of the fact that you're now voluntarily handing this over to people as a form of identification, which means that there's no more privacy involved. You're literally putting that out there. And what that leads to is what I ended the piece on for today was the fact that what you're doing now is you've now created a sense of us repeating the same Salem witch trials again, because anyone who doesn't get this and resist it, not because they think it's necessarily evil and the worst thing that ever happened, but just because it hasn't been tested long enough, if they resist it, they now have to stay with the masks on, the new scarlet letter, and be ostracized by society. And what that eventually does is it does recreate the Salem witch trials, because the moral majority will win and they will be persecuted. And in this situation, intellectually speaking, they're being basically crucified for the fact that we don't want to take something that we don't know the long-term ramifications to. And so when you sit there, and especially as a spiritual person, and you speak to things like this, one of the things you have to do first is ground your energies to understand that you're going to ruffle some feathers. And whether or not people agree or disagree with me, the fact of the matter is that once the Patriot Act happened, we actually realized that sometimes what happens with our big brother government, if you will, that they tend to do things in a backhanded way. Remember, the Patriot Act actually gave us the right, the government gave them the right to access your personal information without a search warrant, as long as they could tie you to belief that you were a terrorist during the whole 9/11 thing, right? Okay. So with that, now just instead of thinking about it as you're being accused of terrorist activity, now think about it as you're being accused of being a COVID carrier, and then they can access your information without a warrant. And so that's one of the many layers that was going on to this whole situation. So as I thought about it, as I sat with this information, and I thought about whether or not I was going to speak to it, I realized that because I have a very visionary mind in the sense that I see things in both visual and I see things in written forms. And my healing gifts are in those two formats. And I realized what it was that I tend to speak to different demographics in different ways, right? Just like the onion scenario, it's different layers to how I speak to people. In written form, on the LinkedIn, I have about 1,000 followers. And on that particular format, that forum, that collective consciousness, I speak to more of the intelligentsia aspect to it, right? People who are very well-to-do, have studied a lot, and are more open to such ideology or such theology. Whereas with YouTube, it's a much wider array of people. So I keep it a little bit more simple. Now, notice I don't speak down to people. I still speak to you at the same vibration that I would intelligentsia in the written form, but I speak in a more easy to understand and grasp concept, so that when you see me and you see that I'm actually not meaning anything ill will towards anyone, and I'm actually saying that it's good or bad, or I'm just pointing out the legal loopholes that are being created around this scenario, that you understand visually that I'm not actually intending to do anything that harms you. And that's one of the reasons that the panel discussion show that I'm trying to get done is so important, is because you can then see a group of people that would be talking about this topic from all the multiple perspectives, and it would allow you as the audience member to feel included in the conversation, and you would be able to come to your own opinion on things. And it reminded me of something I'd seen in, I think it was William Meader's piece. He had been doing something where he mentioned that in esoteric theosophy, they speak to the fact that we are heading towards a space where we are going to be more inclusionary, and the oneness that we are creating is built on the idea of actually bringing all people to the table, and how that oneness will propel us forward to make the right decisions and right relations and so forth. So with the panel discussion, what that does is exactly that. It brings you into the conversation and it allows you to hear why I'm saying what I'm saying and understand it on varying levels. So with my particular formatting, as you've noticed, I have literally, I don't know, like 100 articles out there on LinkedIn that are really well received for the most part. They at least make people think. You know what I mean? If I get at least 5 people to really consider something, then that's growth, right? So we're not stagnant. But what I then do with this particular channel is I then make the video quality to it to match it, so that there's 2 different ways of reaching people. But I don't bombard people. I invite them to the table and I allow them to come in and decide if they want to participate or not with the format or with what I'm talking about. And that's one of the great avenues with the panel discussions, and why PBS or CNN seems to be the more way to go, because of the fact that people will feel like they're not being bombarded with information, but it's something that they can like kind of add into their day if they like. So with the revelation that came with the whole piece, what I really wanted to focus our attention on is the fact that as we're spiritually centered individuals, the more that we go through this process, the more awakened we are to the fact that we do have questions that do have valid concern to it. And the only way to truly expose the things that we're most concerned about, or shadows that really need to be addressed, because they're still there, no matter who you are, you can still see how those loopholes actually do exist now because of the P word. And so instead of denying it, why not work together and try to either make my concerns go down a little bit, or help you expand your concerns so that we don't give our rights away more freely. We're not sheep, although they treat us like sheep. And so one of the great things about this particular stance is understand that I actually have nothing against either religion or government. I think they're both absolutely needed, and I have no interest in reformation or any of that. But we do have to address some of the little potholes and issues that are popping up left, right, and center, so as to not fully give away our rights as human beings and our soul's rights. And so on this moment, I'm going to reference another really gifted woman who, of course, you guys know that I really love, and her name is Natalie over at Watch Natalie, and she runs the Artegan. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is she did a recent post, I think it was called the 800 year or something or another, it's like from a day or two ago, and she spoke to the fact that this has happened before, and she spoke very eloquently to how it was done regarding religious persecution and whatnot. And now I'm drawing the parallel to that. So because it's time to reveal the information. So though you may find what I'm saying either a trigger point or you find it asinine, it will leave a lasting impression on you because of the fact that it does open so many holes into your rights. And though we love our government and though we believe in our government, we do know that they do have a backhanded way of doing things sometimes. So though I'm definitely not speaking against the government as a whole, there does seem to be a consistency here that does beg our question as to whether or not this is really all that up and up, right? Because technically, you know, it is Roe v. Wade that controls our right to our own body and what we inject or what we put into it. So this is kind of a loophole way for the Supreme Court to do their dirty work, if you will. I'm not saying the Supreme Court is dirty. What I'm saying, though, is like any dirty work, like special interests. They can push their specialized interests upon the community under the guise of fear tactics and fear mongering, and that distracts the people from actually looking at the underlying current of what they're actually after, which would be overturning a very controversial thing that gives women the rights to control their own body. But it also gives men the right to their own body too. Hence the issue that we see there. And then, of course, when it comes to the whole thing with the Patriot Act, what that opened up was the ability to go in under one situation and use that to actually access something else. But by us now actually turning the popularity opinion that we all need to do this, what it does is it makes it much easier for them to then go against the HIPAA and all of the privacy acts that actually govern and protect our medical information, so that we do not down the road get incarcerated for something that we do based on information that used to be illegal for them to obtain without the warrant. Do you see the problem? So when you are a spiritual person, what I wanted to just kind of get on here and say is that always stand true for your integrity. Whatever they're going to do, if people are going to lash out at me, or if people are going to get mad at me, then take it. Because at the end of the day, your soul is the one in the Great Academy, and you are standing there in your power and in your integrity, stating what you're seeing. And if people don't like it, that's not your fucking problem, to be quite honest with you. People need to have exposure to other people's opinions and have multiple perspectives given to them so that they can evolve too. One of the weirdest things that I've ever noticed in our spiritual circles is this ideology that fundamentalism is the only way to go. Now, first of all, y'all know I'm all about faith. So the fact, though, that we actually use it as a separatist way to keep the division amongst all the people drives me up the wall, because that is not God-like, that's not Allah-like, that's not something with a divine intention. That is all about unity and love energy. And here we are actually witnessing the segregation of the population to keep us divided and keep us small. So with topics like this, if you find yourself spiritually centered and in a place where you're being called by something higher to speak your truth and take whatever the repercussions are, know that it is your attention to the fact that if you focus on being afraid of it, then you create the fear reasoning that led to whatever the undermining is, right? So essentially, if you put your attention on being afraid to speak your truth, then there's going to be consequences to your truth. But if you go into it very candidly and openly in different formats, if you want, that you mean no ill will, you're just raising a very valid point, then people are less likely going to attack you for it, and they're more likely going to be open to it, which is why the panel discussions are so important. So as that put that article out there, what I wanted to say to you all is that courage begins the moment that you start thinking of other people before yourself. And it's really one of those things that is a divine quality that all of us actually has. What I want for you all to remember as you see this video and look at the link below that connects you to that actual article, understand that there are valid concerns there, and there are loopholes that are opening because of us being distracted. So it's very important for everybody to at least listen to it, get what they need from it, and then decide. But at least listen to the conversation so that you know where I'm coming from and where a lot of the other spiritualists are coming from. And that's all I wanted to say, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. That's it for Altruistic Channels. Bye.